Man becomes whole only through the knowledge and acceptance of his unconscious. Have you ever felt like awareness itself has become too heavy to carry? Like the more you understand yourself, the more you seem to lose your peace? We grow up believing that knowledge brings freedom, that awakening will flood our lives with light and clarity. But no one warns you that light, when too bright, can blind, that the deeper you see, the more invisible wounds you uncover. Jung once said that becoming conscious is not an escape from suffering, but a confrontation with it. Because to awaken is not to drift above your humanity. It's to feel its full weight for the first time. Awareness doesn't make you immune to pain. It makes you more sensitive to it. You begin to feel the cracks in the world, the silent cries in others, the loneliness that hides behind laughter. And that sensitivity, though sacred, can hurt. There comes a moment in every seeker's life when clarity turns into ache. You start noticing every motive, every pattern, every shadow behind your smile. You see how fear shapes your kindness, how pride hides inside your humility, how love often carries a silent need to be needed. And once you've seen these things, you can't unsee them. The mirror of consciousness doesn't allow you to look away anymore. It forces you to stand still and face yourself. Stripped of illusions, stripped of excuses, stripped of the comforting stories that you use to protect your ego. That's the unseen burden of consciousness. It's not the pain of ignorance, but the fatigue of seeing everything too clearly. You begin to understand that every insight splits you in two, between who you used to be and who you are becoming. Jung called this the tension of opposites, the sacred struggle between the light and the dark within us. To carry that tension without collapsing is perhaps the truest definition of inner work. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, he wrote. And when you live those words, they stop sounding poetic. They become raw truth. Because awareness doesn't erase your conflicts, it exposes them. It tears the mask from your face and demands authenticity. You start to feel in your body, the tight chest, the restless nights, the sense that even silence is loud. The psyche resists exposure like eyes burning under sunlight after years of darkness. You begin to realize that every revelation takes energy, that every new truth asks something from you. To know yourself is to carry yourself with all the contradictions you once tried to hide. There is a humility that comes with that realization, a quiet acceptance that awakening isn't a victory, but an initiation. You are no longer chasing light. You are learning to hold it without shattering under its heat. Maybe what you call anxiety is not proof that you're failing, but a symptom that you're waking up. Maybe the exhaustion you feel isn't weakness. It's your soul recalibrating under the weight of new light. Jung saw this as the sacred fatigue of awareness, the moment when the unconscious stops being a stranger and starts knocking at your door. It is a meeting point between your surface and your depth, between the part of you that pretends and the part that aches to be real. You start to notice how much of your life was performance. The way you smiled to avoid conflict, the way you agreed to be loved, the way you stayed silent to feel safe. Awakening pulls those patterns to the surface, not to punish you, but to show you the truth. You've been living half asleep. Imagine holding a mirror that grows heavier each time you dare to look deeper. At first, it's easy. You admire the surface, the parts you already know, but the longer you hold it, the more it reflects. The mirror begins to tremble with memories, regrets, and emotions you once buried. The weight builds slowly. With every truth, every wound, every recognition of your own duality, your arms start to shake, not from weakness, but from honesty. You realize that authenticity is not light. It is dense, alive, demanding. It asks for courage, for surrender, for compassion toward the parts of you that once felt unworthy of love. So, if your awakening feels like exhaustion, you're not broken. You're transforming. You're learning to bear the light without denying the shadow. Because consciousness was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be complete. And what is unseen, unacknowledged, unspoken, still rules you from within. The goal was never to escape the dark, but to bring a candle into it and learn to stay. That's where freedom begins. Not in running from your depths, but in embracing them. But what exactly is this hidden weight Jung spoke of? And why does becoming conscious so often feel like punishment instead of freedom? Jung realized that the human mind is not a quiet library of thoughts, neatly arranged and waiting to be understood. It's a living battlefield, a space where the light of consciousness and the darkness of the unconscious are constantly wrestling for balance. Every act of awareness, every attempt to understand yourself, stirs forces that were once sleeping. To wake up is to summon what was hidden. To see the truth is to awaken the parts of you that have been waiting for centuries to be seen. Take Elena, for example. For years, she lived half asleep inside her routines. Efficient, polite, emotionally distant. She called it stability, but it was actually numbness. Then one day, she decided to begin therapy. The first weeks felt like liberation. She started naming her fears, recognizing her projections, and understanding why she avoided intimacy. "I finally feel light," she told her therapist. But then, something unexpected happened. The dreams came back, the same dreams she had as a child, filled with dark corridors and voices calling her name. Her emotions started to overflow. She would cry while washing dishes, feel rage without reason, and suddenly sense an invisible grief rising from her chest. "Why does awareness hurt more than ignorance?" she asked. This is a paradox Jung explored his entire life. Consciousness is not just expansion, it's confrontation. When the ego dares to step beyond its familiar boundaries, it enters the vast and mysterious territory of the unconscious, which Jung described as autonomous and compensatory. It does not obey our logic, it corrects it. In the Naturies of the Psyche, Jung wrote, "Quanto mais unilateral conscientia esse torna, mais o inconscient accomplimenta forces oppostas." The unconscious is not your enemy. It's a living intelligence that restores balance when you've gone too far in one direction. When Elena became more aware, her unconscious didn't punish her. It compensated her. For years, she had lived on one side of herself, rational, controlled, calm. But growth requires wholeness, and wholeness always includes what we've denied. So the psyche pushed back. It brought her forgotten sadness, her buried anger, her hidden capacity to love fiercely. It was chaos, but a necessary one. The very pain she wanted to avoid was the medicine her soul needed. This is the cost of becoming aware. Every light casts a shadow. Every realization disrupts an ancient equilibrium. When you expand one side of the psyche, the other rises to meet it. The more you ascend toward light, the more darkness you must integrate. Jung understood that true awareness is not one-sided enlightenment. It's the dance between opposites. The unconscious refuses to let us become angels without first embracing our human depths. So, when you awaken, you don't just see more light, you also see more what that light exposes. You become sensitive to every subtle hypocrisy in yourself, every contradiction you used to dismiss. Awareness is not a peaceful lake. It's a storm that purifies by revealing what was always there. The burden is not a curse. It's the psyche's way of insisting on balance. Elena's story is the story of anyone who dares to awaken. Her tears are not weakness. They are symbols of her soul learning to breathe again. Because when you reconnect with what was once numb, life stops being flat. You begin to feel everything: joy, pain, wonder, longing, all at once. You start to live with open eyes, and that inevitably is heavy. But here's the dangerous question Jung left us with. If the unconscious always compensates every expansion of light, what happens when someone refuses to listen to that counterforce, when consciousness expands faster than the soul can hold? In our modern world, awareness has become a kind of religion. We worship self-knowledge, quote spiritual teachers, analyze our childhood wounds, and chase higher consciousness like it's the finish line of evolution. But Jung warned that too much light without enough grounding leads not to freedom, but to inflation. The ego, intoxicated by its own discoveries, begins to believe it is the light. He called this the inflation of consciousness, a state where the seeker mistakes awareness of the self for embodiment of it. It's like reading about the ocean and thinking you've already swum across it. The result is subtle pride, exhaustion, and the quiet disintegration of the soul beneath the surface of spiritual confidence. You see this everywhere today. People overflowing with knowledge, yet starved of meaning. They read every book, attend every workshop, recite every Jung quote, but inside, they feel emptier than before. They become full of light in theory, but hollow in being, because the problem was never ignorance. It's indigestion. They've swallowed too much truth too fast, and the psyche hasn't had time to absorb it. Jung compared this to feeding a patient medicine faster than their system can metabolize. It doesn't heal, it overwhelms. He saw this often in his patients. Those who awaken prematurely experience a kind of psychological vertigo. They saw too much, too soon. The light they sought revealed not peace, but chaos. The unconscious, once stirred, doesn't return quietly to sleep. It floods a mind with symbols, emotions, and images that the ego isn't yet strong enough to bear. In O eu eo inconscient, Jung observed, O inconscient neo pod ser escatado pela analise. Ele continua producer sonhos e símbolos, buscando incessantemente compensar unilateralidade do eu. The unconscious is endless. It keeps creating, keeps balancing, keeps demanding wholeness. When the conscious mind tries to dominate it, the psyche fights back through confusion, fatigue, or crisis. This is a law of psychic economy. For every ascent into light, there must be an equal descent into darkness. The psyche insists on symmetry. For every revelation, there's a reckoning. Every truth you discover about yourself has a shadow attached to it, waiting to be accepted. You cannot transcend what you have not yet integrated. To bypass your wounds in the name of enlightenment is to build a glass tower on sand. Think about it. How many people pursue awareness as an escape from their pain? They meditate not to feel, but to avoid feeling. They use psychology to dissect their wounds rather than to heal them. They mistake observation for transformation. But consciousness that outruns the soul becomes dangerous. It creates a split, a person who can describe their trauma perfectly, yet still lives enslaved by it. They understand everything but embody nothing. Jung saw this inflation as one of the most perilous stages of the individuation process, the moment when the ego believes it has arrived. The unseen burden of consciousness is precisely this. Once you start seeing, you must carry what you see. Awareness does not dissolve the shadow. It illuminates it, making it impossible to ignore. You begin to realize that the light you've been seeking has been burning from within the darkness all along, that the higher you rise in understanding, the deeper your roots must grow into humility. And that's the paradox of awakening. It expands your vision, but also your responsibility. Because once your eyes open, you can no longer pretend you don't know. Every truth demands action. Every insight demands embodiment. Seeing is the beginning. Carrying is the real work. But what happens if we ignore this balancing law? If we continue to expand awareness while neglecting the darkness that feeds it? What happens when consciousness rises faster than the soul can hold? When consciousness grows faster than the soul's ability to hold it, something begins to tear within us. What once felt vibrant becomes flat. The world loses its color. Relationships lose their warmth, and work becomes mechanical repetition. You wake up in the morning, see everything clearly, yet feel nothing deeply. That's the paradox of too much awareness. It reveals everything but removes your capacity to feel alive inside it. Jung called this a loss of soul, a psychic condition that emerges when the intellect expands beyond the heart's capacity to keep pace. It's not madness, it's emptiness, a hollowing of being. In Psychologia Religio, Jung observed that modern man suffers not so much from sin, but from the loss of meaning. He wrote that the gods did not die, they became diseases. When the sacred symbols that once gave structure to our psyche are dismissed as superstition, they don't disappear. They sink into the unconscious and return disguised as neurosis. The anxiety that grips your chest, the depression that drains your will, the obsession that never quiets. These are the ancient gods returning, demanding reverence in the only way we now understand, through suffering. What we call psychological distress is often the soul's cry for reunion. When the mind races ahead of the spirit, fragmentation begins. The person who carries too much consciousness without grounding starts mistaking understanding for transformation. They talk about healing, but avoid feeling. They analyze love, but no longer risk it. Their intellect swells while their heart withers. They become spectators of their own life, watching themselves live instead of living. Jung warned that this detached state, which he called a spiritual anesthesia, is not enlightenment but defense, a way the psyche protects itself from being overwhelmed by the totality of what has awakened. It's the exhaustion you feel after too much self-analysis, the numbness after too much insight. You've named every wound, but forgotten how to bleed. You've turned the mystery of being into a concept. The sacred became intellectual, the emotional became academic. You could describe your shadow in detail, but you no longer dance with it. And without that dance, without the movement between knowing and feeling, the psyche begins to starve. Jung saw this dissociation everywhere in the modern world. The human being had become clever but disconnected, full of theories but devoid of symbols that nourish the inner life. When meaning disappears, instinct loses direction. The result is spiritual burnout. The soul's fatigue from carrying too much consciousness without enough grounding in reality, in body, in love. The unconscious compensates by creating breakdowns, forcing humility through crisis. The more we cling to control, the more violently the psyche demands surrender. But Jung never saw this collapse as failure. He saw it as initiation. When the intellect fractures under the pressure of its own light, the soul finally has a chance to speak. The gods become diseases, he said, but it is up to us to find them again within. The burnout, the numbness, the loss of meaning, these are not endings. They are thresholds. What breaks you open is not punishment, it's preparation. The loss of soul is an invitation to return to it. So the real question is not why this happens, but how we cross it. How do we transform this unbearable weight, this fatigue of awareness, into something sacred, something that heals instead of destroys? How do we turn the breakdown into meaning? Jung's path was never about escaping the burden of consciousness. It was about learning to carry it with awareness. Transformation doesn't begin when you eliminate tension. It begins when you stop running from it. He taught that real growth comes from holding the opposites, allowing light and shadow, spirit and instinct to coexist within the same heart. The goal is not perfection, but balance, a dynamic, living dialogue between all that you are. This lifelong process he called individuation, the gradual integration of unconscious contents into consciousness, creating a self that is whole, not idealized. Individuation isn't a concept to understand. It's a path to live. Jung saw it as the alchemy of the soul, the art turning psychological lead into spiritual gold. It's not about adding more knowledge, but about digesting the truths you already carry. It's a spiral movement, where each crisis returns you to a deeper level of yourself. The outer world becomes a mirror of your inner process. Every conflict, every heartbreak, every coincidence becomes symbolic material for your transformation. It begins with recognition. You notice the subtle signs of imbalance, recurring dreams, sudden fatigue, unexplained anxiety, emotional numbness. These are not malfunctions. They are messages. The psyche speaks in symptoms when words fail. Every sleepless night, every repetitive mistake, every emotional drought carries a hidden instruction. Something in you needs to be seen. Jung believed that nothing in the soul happens by accident. Everything serves a greater work of wholeness. Then comes dialogue. Instead of silencing the unconscious, you begin to converse with it. You write your dreams, draw your symbols, sit in stillness and let the images speak. You start listening to the voices within, not to obey them blindly, but to understand what they want. The unconscious is not a monster to be conquered. It's a neglected companion waiting to be acknowledged. When you stop fighting it, you discover that it doesn't wish to destroy you. It wishes to complete you. The next phase is integration. When a shadow arises, the instinct is to dissect it, to analyze it to death. But Jung reminds us, the shadow doesn't need explanation. It needs relationship. You live with it. You feel its discomfort, its resistance, its truth. Slowly it softens. Its darkness begins to reveal light. Every quality you once rejected, your anger, envy, fear, transforms when it's accepted. What was once a wound becomes a source of compassion, and what was once chaos becomes creative energy. And then action, awareness that stays in the mind changes nothing. Jung insisted that realization must become embodiment. Say no where your old pattern said yes. Pause before reacting. Speak when fear tells you to stay silent. Practice what your insight demands. Integration without behavior is imagination. Transformation begins in motion. In A Naturalise of the Psyche, Jung described the mechanism behind this alchemy, the funkeo transcendent or transcendent function, the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. He wrote, "A funkeo transcendent nastu conflito entre as attitudes conscienza and conscience, e crea uma nova attitude, superior as duas." In other words, the struggle itself births something higher, a third path, a new way of being that harmonizes what was once divided. Your suffering isn't asking to be solved. It's asking to evolve, because pain, when endured consciously, transforms. Every descent into darkness is a preparation for light. The very weight that once crushed you becomes a ground that stabilizes you. When you stop resisting the opposites and begin to live their dialogue, you stop swinging between extremes and start to dance between them. That is individuation, not a state of bliss, but a state of wholeness. But even here, danger waits in disguise. The moment you feel whole, the ego whispers, "Now I am enlightened," and that single illusion that the work is finished can destroy everything you built. The closer we move toward integration, the subtler the ego becomes. In the early stages, it's easy to recognize the ego's resistance, pride, fear, defensiveness. But once we've done enough inner work, once we start feeling awake, the ego puts on a new mask, one that looks remarkably like enlightenment. Jung called this the last shadow, spiritual inflation. It's the moment when the ego, overwhelmed by the magnitude of self, begins to identify with it. The individual stops saying, "I am part of something greater," and starts whispering, "I am that greatness." What was once devotion turns into possession. The light that once guided becomes a mirror that blinds. This inflation doesn't arrive loudly. It seeps in quietly. Through small thoughts, subtle comparisons, a growing sense of superiority wrapped in spiritual humility. You start believing your suffering was somehow more meaningful, your insights more profound. You talk about consciousness as if you own it. The ego learns the language of light, using awareness as armor instead of revelation. What once was healing becomes hierarchy. There are several traps along this path, and each one wears a disguise of wisdom. The first is the savior complex. The belief that your awakening obligates you to awaken everyone else. You begin to preach rather than live, to fix rather than love. You forget that everyone must meet their own shadow in their own time. The second is isolation. The quiet conviction that no one could possibly understand your depth. It's the loneliness of those who stand atop a mountain they built themselves, forgetting that wisdom without connection becomes desert. Then comes regression, the temptation to idealize the past once the fire of transformation grows painful. You long for simplicity, for numbness, for the comfort of not knowing. Growth always includes nostalgia for ignorance. It's the psyche's way of reminding you how far you come. And finally, there's a denial of the human, the tendency to label ordinary emotions like anger, sadness, or desire as low vibration. This rejection fractures the soul once more, creating a new shadow under the name of purity. Each of these traps turns wisdom into armor. They protect you from pain, but also from evolution. The psyche cannot evolve behind a shield of superiority. Jung often compared this final danger to the myth of Lucifer, the light bearer who falls because he believes the light is his. The moral isn't about punishment. It's about misidentification. The purpose of light was never to elevate one above others, but to illuminate the path for all, beginning within. The goal is not to shine above life, but through it. Only humility keeps consciousness alive. The moment you think you've arrived, you begin to decay. The spiritual path is not a ladder you climb, but a circle you walk, endlessly deepening, endlessly humbling. Jung wrote in Os Archetypos eo inconscient cultivo, e individuo neo temifiam. O self am processo vivo, neo uma meta alcancavo. Wholeness isn't a destination. It's a rhythm, a continuous balancing between knowing and not knowing, between a human and a divine. And so, the more integrated you become, the more grateful you grow for your own imperfections. You stop trying to escape your humanity and start embodying it as the sacred vessel it always was. Because only what is human can hold what is divine. The light was never yours to possess. It was always life moving through you, shaping you, dissolving you, creating you anew in every breath. And when we finally stop trying to possess the light, when we allow it to flow through us without resistance, without pride, something extraordinary begins to happen. At the end of the long road, something quiet and miraculous begins to happen. The burden of consciousness that once felt unbearable softens. It no longer presses down on you. It moves through you. Awareness stops being something you hold. It starts holding you. The opposites within, your light and shadow, joy and sorrow, certainty and doubt, stop pulling in opposite directions. They begin to dance. What once felt like conflict becomes rhythm. The self that used to fragment under the pressure of awareness becomes transparent. Like clear water reflecting the sky, you don't dissolve into nothingness. You become a vessel through which life itself can see. This is what Jung meant when he said the psyche seeks not perfection, but wholeness. In O Hamem Isa Symbolos, he reminded us that the goal of the human journey is not to become flawless, but whole, to reconcile what was divided, to love what was feared, to live what was denied. The truly conscious person doesn't rise above life. They re-enter it fully awake. They still feel pain, still make mistakes, still cry at night. But now, these experiences no longer break them. They expand them. Awareness becomes compassion. Not the sentimental kind, but the kind born from seeing the shared humanity in all things. The unseen burden of consciousness turns into a sacred weight, like gravity itself, steady and faithful, keeping you grounded while the soul continues its orbit around meaning. You no longer fear your emotions or hide from your thoughts. You let them pass through, learning that every feeling, even sorrow, is an invitation to presence. You hold awareness with tenderness now, not tension, as one holds a child, not a weapon. You no longer dissect your inner world. You listen to it. You no longer demand to understand everything. You allow mystery to have its place at the table. And then you begin to notice something subtle. The same light that once revealed your wounds now illuminates the world around you. You start seeing others not as projections, but as mirrors of your own becoming. You listen more, judge less. You speak slower, love deeper. Compassion replaces analysis. Gratitude replaces striving. The mirror you once feared has become a window, transparent, open, alive. Through it, the divine looks back, smiling in simplicity of being. The journey ends where it began, in the human heart. But now that heart beats with a different rhythm, the rhythm of understanding. You see that consciousness was never meant to lift you out of life, but to unite you with it. You are no longer a seeker looking for light. You are the space where light and darkness meet and become one. The ego no longer leads, it listens. Awareness has become love in motion. To be truly awake is not to escape the darkness, but to carry its light. If this message resonated, pause for a moment and comment below. I choose to carry my light with humility.